I never thought I'd step foot in my childhood home again, at least not for Christmas. Yet there I was, 35 years old, driving down the same Maple Street where my entire story began. The houses looked the same, festive lights, wreaths on doors, families gathering for warmth and love. But for me, this wasn't just a holiday dinner. It was a test of who I had become after 7 years of silence, distance, and resentment. When I pulled up in the rented Toyota, I kept my breathing steady. My real car, a Tesla customized to my exact taste, sat in my San Francisco garage. I didn't bring it. I didn't want to give my family one more reason to whisper, to dismiss, to assume things about me before I could even open my mouth. No, this time I would walk in with nothing but myself. A plain sweater, old jeans, no makeup beyond the bare minimum. Only one secret luxury clung to me. My watch, a gift to myself the day my company hit 1 million users. I tugged my sleeve down to hide it. It had been 7 years since I last sat at that dining table. 7 years since my father, Harold Wilson, told me in no uncertain terms that I didn't belong in the family legacy. To him, only my brothers did. Vincent, the eldest, sharp with numbers, the golden heir apparent. Gregory, younger but magnetic, able to charm a room like it was nothing. And then there was me. Lacey, the middle child, the daughter. The one told again and again that business is a man's world and my future should be tied to a good husband, not a company. It wasn't the 1950s. It was the early 2000s. But my father never left that decade behind. My mother, Diane, would shoot me soft glances of sympathy when he dismissed me, but she never challenged him. She was the kind of woman raised to stand behind a man, never beside him. And so I fought my battles alone. School became my refuge. Where my brothers joined Dad at client dinners and golf games, I locked myself in the computer lab. I still remember Mrs. Bennett, my high school computer science teacher, telling me, "You have a gift, Lacey. Technology is the future, and you could be part of building it." Those words were oxygen to me. When Stanford accepted me, I thought I had won. But my father scoffed. "California, ridiculous. The family business is here. Real businesses make products and profits, not computer toys." When I begged him for help to cover tuition, he refused. "Your brothers need the money. You'll figure something out." So I did. 3 jobs, endless nights, loans stacked on loans. I arrived at Stanford exhausted but determined. While my brothers coasted through college on family money, I scraped by. I worked mornings as a waitress, afternoons folding shirts, and retail nights bookkeeping for local shops. I survived on 4 hours of sleep during finals. But I graduated with honors, and more importantly, with fire in my veins. My first startup job in San Francisco paid almost nothing, but it gave me everything. Experience, courage, the blueprint for building from the ground up. When that company was acquired, I walked away with just enough savings and enough wisdom to dream of my own venture. Back in Oak Ridge, my brothers were already installed as executives. Every phone call from my mother was a report card on their triumphs. Vincent expanded operations. Gregory closed a new deal. "Your father is so proud." She never said the same about me. The last time I came home 10 years ago, I had just launched my first company, a healthcare platform powered by artificial intelligence technology that could change lives. At dinner, when I mentioned raising venture capital, my father sneered, "Series A. What does that even mean? Real businesses don't survive on investor charity." Vincent chuckled. "Dad's right, Lacey. When are you going to get a real job?" I left the next morning without saying goodbye. That was the night I stopped being a daughter in this family and became a ghost. 7 years later, I rang that doorbell again. My mother answered, eyes misting, as she pulled me into her arms. "Lacey, you made it." Her perfume smelled the same, like faded roses and talcum powder. For a second, I was 15 again, walking into warmth. But then I stepped inside, and there he was. My father in his armchair, king of his empire. His hair fully gray now, but his posture still sharp. He didn't get up, didn't hug me, didn't even smile. Just nodded and said, "Lacey." Not a welcome, not love, just a statement. Dinner felt like a stage play. My brothers bragged about expansion profits, new clients. My father beamed. When eyes turned to me, I said little. What was the point? They didn't care. I was still the one who left. Until dessert. My father tapped his glass, his voice booming as always. He praised my brothers' announced succession plans, handed over his empire to them with glowing words of pride. Then his gaze turned to me. His tone shifted sharp and cold. As for inheritance, he said, I've revised my will. Vincent and Gregory will inherit the company and the majority of assets. Lacey, you will not be receiving an inheritance. The words fell like knives, and yet they didn't wound me the way they once would have. 7 years ago I might have cried, begged, broken down, but now I simply nodded, lifted my fork, and took a bite of pie. I understand. But beneath the table, my niece Emma whispered, Are you okay? Her 12-year-old eyes looked at me with more kindness than my father ever had. I smiled and told her, I'm fine, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups have complicated relationships. I thought that would be the end of the night, but then Jackson, my teenage nephew, gasped, staring at his phone. Grandpa, Aunt Lacey is on the Forbes billionaire list. The room froze. Forks midair. My father's eyes narrowed. What did you say? Jackson held up the phone, his hands trembling with excitement. Look, it's her picture. It says she's worth $3.2 billion. All eyes turned to me, and for the first time in my life I didn't shrink. I met their stares and said simply, Yes, that's correct. The questions hit me all at once, a dozen voices piling over each other in a storm. How long, how much, what company did I really build it? Why didn't I say anything? Why was I driving a rental? If the number on that screen was real. I lifted a hand, and to my surprise, the noise softened like someone dimming the lights. I heard my own voice, steady and clear, as if a part of me had been waiting years to speak without flinching. I told them I founded a healthcare AI platform 7 years ago, that we started with rare diseases because so many patients are lost in the space between symptoms and certainty. That our system studied millions of records patterns the human eye can't always hold and offered doctors a map when every hallway looked the same. I told them about the acquisition last month, the mix of cash and stock, the way the deal brought years of sleepless nights into focus, not as an ending, but as proof the vision had been real all along. My mother's eyes filled first, not with the stunned pride I expected, but with confusion that hurt to look at. Why didn't you tell us? She asked, voice small and trembling at the edges. And I didn't have a perfect answer. Only the truth that had kept me company in every quiet apartment, every lonely Uber, to yet another late-night meeting. I wanted to be seen for who I was, not for what I could be useful for. I wanted to come home as me, not as a number that changed the temperature in the room. I wanted a father, not a financier. I wanted brothers, not shareholders. Saying that out loud left the air heavy but honest. It was the most honest thing we'd shared as a family in years. Vincent's mouth twitched, part incredulity, part recalculation. He tried on a new tone, brisk and collegial. We should talk synergy, he said, as if the word itself could erase everything that came before it. Manufacturing is ripe for AI optimization. Gregory elbowed him lightly, a half laugh, half warning. Even he seemed to understand the ground had shifted beneath the table legs, and not just because of the money. My niece Emma leaned toward me, eyes wide as orbiting moons. Is it true your computer helps doctors? She whispered like a secret. I nodded and watched awe light her face from within. In that moment, I swore I could trace the line from Mrs. Bennett's classroom to this child's hungry curiosity and feel time collapse into a single bright thread. My father said nothing. He sat with Jackson's phone cupped in his large hand, reading and rereading the screen as if the pixels might rearrange themselves into a familiar story that fit his rules. When he finally looked up, the certainty that had always lived between his eyebrows had thinned. 3.2, he murmured unfinished, like he couldn't bring himself to say the word after it. Then his eyes found mine, really found me, and something in his gaze shifted from judgment to searching. For once, I didn't rush in to fill the silence. I let the quiet do its work. We had spent years using noise to avoid the one thing that mattered, the cost of not seeing each other. Questions turned practical. What does it actually do? Heather asked, chin in her hand, the way she listened to her own son when he talked about computers. So I explained without the pitch deck voice, without the polished metaphors I used on stages. I told them about the mother in St. Louis who carried a folder of test results like a talisman for 3 years, until the system saw what everyone else missed. About the oncologist who cried in a sterile hallway because a recommendation bought a teenager 6 more months to say the things that needed saying. I watched the room unclench, not because money had suddenly made me respectable, but because what I'd built touched something they could understand: the fierce, ordinary love that makes us refuse to give up on the people we cannot live without. Only then did my father stand. He didn't clear his throat. He didn't tap a glass. He just rose, set the phone down on the white linen, and tilted his head toward the hallway. The gesture reached back to every time he'd summoned me to his study as a child, the place where pronouncements wore the shape of love. I felt the old ache flare in my chest, then cool. I was not the girl who walked into that room pleading to be allowed near the levers. I was a woman with her own machinery. Still, I followed. I had been bracing for this conversation since the moment I decided to come. The study smelled the same, a quiet blend of leather and cedar, and the memory of cigars from a decade ago. The chair behind the desk seemed to know his spine, the way it fit him into authority without effort. He closed the door gently, and for a heartbeat, neither of us spoke. He looked at the photographs on the shelf, at the frozen faces of my brothers in golf shirts and ribbon cuttings, at the blank space where my picture might have been, if I'd ever chosen to stand still long enough for him to pin me to his version of legacy. When he finally met my gaze, I saw something I had longed for and feared: uncertainty. It softened him in a way nothing else had. "What you've done," he said, the sentence wavering as if he were crossing a narrow bridge, "is formidable." It was the closest thing to wonder I had ever heard in his voice. I took a breath that felt like a beginning and an ending at once. I told him I hadn't come for his money, hadn't come to be added back into a will that never knew where to put me. I had come because I had a father-shaped ache and a finite number of Christmases left to decide whether we would die with it. His shoulders sagged, some long-held certainty finally setting itself down. "I thought I was protecting you," he said. "From risk. From disappointment. From a world that breaks people like it's nothing." His hands opened and closed on the desk, as if searching for a tool he understood. I didn't see that I was the one doing the breaking. The words landed between us like a confession and a key. I told him what protection would have looked like for me: not a gate, but a hand on my back when the road pitched upward. Not a no, but a, "How can I help you?" try. He stared at his wedding ring, at the grooves where work had carved its own map across his knuckles. "I don't know how to fix what I did," he whispered, and there was a tremor in it that I had only ever heard when he was very tired, very human, very late at night. "We start by not pretending it didn't happen," I said. "Then we practice another way." The old chair creaked as he leaned back, and I watched the outline of the man I had built in my mind, the impenetrable one, blur at the edges. He nodded slowly, as if learning a new muscle. "I can try," he said. It wasn't an apology yet, but it was movement. He sat there for a long moment, his eyes drifting across the shelves that had once seemed like altars to my brother's accomplishments. For the first time, I noticed the gaps, the empty spaces where frames could have held other stories, different possibilities, maybe even mine. His fingers tapped lightly on the desk, the rhythm of a man wrestling with words he had never practiced. "I was wrong," he said finally, each syllable slow, deliberate, as though he feared the sentence might collapse under its own weight. "I measured you by what I understood, by what I knew how to value. And when you didn't fit, I convinced myself you didn't belong." His voice cracked, and that single fracture carried more than all his proclamations over the years. I let the silence hold us. My heart beat so hard it felt like it might bruise me from the inside. Part of me wanted to collapse into the apology, to accept it like water after years of drought. Another part wanted to push back, to make him feel the sharpness of every dismissal, every no that had shaped the woman I became. Instead, I said, "Do you know how many nights I worked until dawn? Not because I had to, but because I was terrified it would all slip through my fingers if I let go for even a second. Do you know how it feels to want so badly to be seen that you build something unignorable, even if it kills you? His jaw tightened and he lowered his eyes. I should have been proud of you long before tonight. You should have, I said, not to twist the knife, but to honor the truth that had been denied too long. And then I softened because I could see the man before me wasn't the same one who once told me to find a husband instead of a career. He was older now, smaller in his certainty, cracked open by something he couldn't control. Maybe time, maybe me. He leaned forward, elbows on the desk, and his gaze carried a heaviness I wasn't prepared for. How do I make this right? I shook my head. It's not about making it right. It's about starting differently, with honesty, with respect, with the understanding that my worth isn't conditional. I swallowed hard. I didn't come back for revenge, Dad. I came back because I wanted to know if there was still a family here for me, or if I was destined to always be an outsider in my own bloodline. The words hung between us, raw and trembling, until he finally nodded. You're not an outsider, Lacey. Not anymore. It wasn't eloquent, but the weight in his voice told me he meant it. When I left his study, I felt like I'd walked through fire and come out with both scars and clarity. The dining room had shifted in my absence. My mother hovered near the kitchen, her apron still tied, though dinner was long over. When she caught my eye, she gave me a look that was half question, half apology. She pulled me aside. Her hands trembled as she reached for mine. I should have stood up for you more, she whispered. When your father dismissed you, when he refused to help with Stanford, when he made you feel small. I was silent. I thought I was keeping peace, but all I did was let you carry the hurt alone. Tears welled and her voice broke. I'm sorry, Lacey. I should have been braver. Her words pierced deeper than I expected. All my life I'd wanted her to fight for me, to break the silence that felt heavier than my father's commands. Hearing her name, it at last cracked something open in me. I took her hands and squeezed them. You loved me in your way. Maybe not loud enough to drown him out, but I felt it. And I hear you now. She sobbed quietly, relief and regret tangled together. For the first time in years, I pulled her into my arms and let myself be her daughter again. Later on the back porch, Gregory joined me. His breath fogged in the cold December air, his usual confidence dimmed to something quieter. I owe you an apology, too, he said without hesitation. I enjoyed being Dad's favorite. I never stopped to think what that meant for you. I laughed when he dismissed you because it was easier than questioning him. But truthfully, I've always admired you. You built something you weren't afraid. I never had that courage. For a moment, the younger brother I remembered flickered through, the one who once begged me to help him with algebra, the one who cried when he scraped his knee and trusted me to patch him up. I smiled faintly. Thank you for saying that, Gregory. It means more than you think. We stood there in silence, letting the frost bite our cheeks. And for the first time in years, I felt like maybe the cracks in our family could be repaired, not perfectly, but enough. Back inside, Emma sat curled up on the window seat, headphones around her neck, eyes wide as she scrolled through a coding tutorial. She looked up shyly when I approached. I'm trying to learn Python, she admitted, cheeks flushing, but it's kind of confusing. My heart leapt. I sat beside her, the warmth of her curiosity soaking into me like sunlight. I can help you, I said softly. And if you want, I'll introduce you to some women on my team who can mentor you. Her face lit up with wonder. Really, you do that? I hugged her close. Of course, you're the future Emma. Don't ever let anyone tell you that you don't belong. Emma's small hand squeezed mine, and in her eyes I saw the reflection of the girl I once was, the one who sat in the computer lab after hours, clutching every line of code like a secret weapon against invisibility. Only now she wouldn't have to fight alone. She'd have me. That realization filled me with a quiet, fierce joy that no inheritance could ever buy. As the night wore on, the house began to breathe differently. Gone was the brittle air of judgment and hierarchy. In its place, a buzz of curiosity, cautious respect, and the kind of fragile hope that comes when old wounds are acknowledged, if not yet healed. I drifted from conversation to conversation, my story unraveling piece by piece as aunts and uncles asked questions with a mix of awe and genuine interest. Vincent predictably tried again. This time his tone was softer, almost deferential. "You know, Lacey," he said, swirling the last of his wine. "AI could revolutionize supply chains, reduce waste, optimize production lines. Imagine what it could do for manufacturing." He paused, glancing at me, searching for approval. "We should talk. Strategically." Once those words might have sparked a deep ache in me, proof that he only valued me now that I was useful. But tonight I just smiled politely. "Maybe another time," I said. My voice was gentle but firm, and for once I didn't feel the need to defend or explain. Even Aunt Martha leaned close as the evening thinned, her voice low but sure. "Your grandmother would have been proud, you know. She wanted to start a business in the 50s, but your grandfather said it wasn't right for a woman. She poured it all into church committees and charity instead. But she would have seen herself in you." The words sank deep, heavy with history and missed chances. My throat tightened. I whispered, "Thank you," because anything more would have broken me. And then, just when I thought the night had given me all its surprises, Jackson, my restless, phone-obsessed nephew, found me again. His cheeks were flushed, his eyes bright with something new. "Aunt Lacey, do you think I could visit your company, see how it all works, maybe even shadow someone?" His voice wavered, but the hunger in it was unmistakable. I laughed softly, my chest swelling with pride. "How about this summer? Come to California. Spend a few weeks with us. You'll get to see every corner engineering design product, all of it." His jaw dropped. "Are you serious?" That would be insane. His excitement was so pure it made me want to cry. In that moment, I knew the true inheritance was already here. Not land, not stock, not the cold machinery of my father's empire. It was this passing the flame forward to a generation that might never again have to prove they belonged. But just as warmth settled in my phone buzzed sharply in my pocket. Sarah's name lit up the screen, my COO, my anchor in the storm. I excused myself and stepped into the hallway. "Lacey." "I'm sorry," she said quickly, but the integration team pushed a change to the algorithm without proper testing. 3 hospitals are reporting glitches. No patients harmed yet, but the CTO is resisting rollback. We need your authority." I closed my eyes, the taste of apple pie still on my tongue, and felt the split of my two worlds pulling at me. Family on one side, responsibility on the other. "I'll be on a video call in 20 minutes, I said. My voice was calm, decisive. The years of fighting for every inch of respect had honed me for moments like this. When I hung up, my mother was standing nearby, her face etched with concern. "You're leaving." "I have to," I said gently. "But I'll see you tomorrow. Breakfast." Her eyes softened, relief mingling with pride. "Breakfast," she agreed. As I said my goodbyes that night, the hugs were warmer, the handshakes firmer, the silences filled with meaning rather than dismissal. My father even rose from his chair and offered a brief, awkward embrace, the kind that said more in its clumsiness than any polished speech could. "Talk more tomorrow," he muttered, as though the words themselves were unfamiliar. I nodded. "I'd like that." Driving away, the house shrinking in my rearview mirror, I thought of all the times I'd left it before, angry, wounded, unseen. Tonight was different. Tonight I left with the fragile, trembling possibility of something new. Not perfection, not erasure of the past, but the beginning of a bridge. 1 year later, I found myself making the same drive down Maple Street, but this time everything felt different. My hands didn't grip the wheel with tension, my breath didn't catch in my chest at the thought of stepping through that door. I wasn't hiding behind a rental car anymore. I drove my own Tesla, the one I had once tucked away, out of fear of being judged, of being seen as too much. Tonight, I wasn't shrinking to fit anyone's comfort. I was arriving as myself. Snow dusted the roofs and lawns, glittering under the Christmas lights. For the first time in a long time, I felt a strange sense of anticipation that wasn't laced with dread. So much had changed in 12 months. Not perfectly, not easily, but enough to prove that growth was possible even in the stoniest of hearts. My father had been the biggest surprise. 2 weeks after last Christmas, he had called me out of the blue, his voice rough and hesitant. "I've started seeing a therapist," he said. I remember gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles whitened. I never thought I'd hear those words from him. "I want to understand why I treated you the way I did," he admitted, "and I want to do better." That decision had set ripples in motion none of us could have predicted. Since then, he had visited me twice in California, walking the halls of my company with wide, curious eyes, asking questions he once would have scoffed at. He even sat with my engineers, listening to them explain our work like a student eager to learn. For the first time in my life, my father wasn't trying to dominate the conversation. He was trying to understand. The family business had shifted too. Vincent and Gregory had stepped fully into leadership, but with a new lens. They launched internship programs for women in manufacturing, something unthinkable just a year before. They modernized operations, leaning into technology instead of resisting it. And in the most shocking move of all, they invited my mother onto the board of directors. After decades of her voice being dismissed, she now held a seat at the table. I parked in the familiar driveway, the house glowing warmly against the winter night. My mother opened the door before I even knocked, her arms pulling me into a hug so tight I nearly laughed. "Merry Christmas, sweetheart," she whispered. "Everyone's already here, and there are some special guests you'll be happy to see." Inside the living room was alive with chatter and laughter, but it was different now. I froze for a moment at the sight. Sarah, my COO, was leaning against the mantel, animatedly explaining something to Gregory. Two of my youngest engineers were huddled over a laptop with Emma, who looked more grown up, her eyes shining with the same hunger I'd seen last year when she whispered about Python. And Jackson, sweet, curious Jackson, was deep in conversation with one of my data scientists, the mentor I had arranged for him during his summer internship. It was surreal. My two worlds, once kept so carefully apart, were now bleeding together in the most natural way. The family that once dismissed me was now mingling with the team that had carried me through every storm. It was messy, imperfect, but it was real. Then my father appeared, walking toward me with a steadiness I hadn't seen before. He didn't look like the untouchable patriarch anymore. He looked human, changed. He wrapped me in a hug, not awkward this time, but warm, genuine. "Merry Christmas, Lacey," he said softly. "We've got some news to share tonight." When dinner was served, the dining room felt transformed. The long table had been extended to fit everyone, but what struck me most was the seating. My father wasn't at the head anymore. He sat beside my mother in the middle, as though to remind us all that no one person ruled this family now. After the main course, he rose to speak. My stomach nodded instinctively. Old reflexes never fully die. But the man standing before me wasn't the same one who had once declared I would inherit nothing. His voice was steady but softer. "As you know, Vincent and Gregory have done an exceptional job leading Wilson Manufacturing this past year," he began. "But they've also shown me something I hadn't realized until now, that my vision was too narrow. Tonight, I'm proud to announce the Wilson Innovation Fund." A murmur rippled across the table. He continued, "This fund will dedicate a portion of our profits to support women entrepreneurs in technology and manufacturing. It will be led by a board including Diane Lacey, and in time the younger women of our family, starting with Emma once she's old enough." He paused, looking at me, then at Emma, whose face was glowing with astonishment. 5% of the company's annual profits will go directly into supporting women who, like Lacey, have the vision and courage to build something meaningful. The room fell into stunned silence. My breath caught in my throat. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. But he wasn't done. "We're also establishing the Bennett Scholarship, named after the teacher who first inspired Lacey to fully fund college tuition for young women pursuing STEM and business." I glanced at my mother, who was smiling through tears, her pride radiating like light. For the first time, I realized her quiet strength had finally found its voice, and the entire family was listening. That night after dessert, I slipped outside with my father. The air was cold and crisp, stars scattered above us. "The fund," I said softly, "it's incredible. Thank you for doing that." He looked up at the night sky, then back at me. I spent too many years closing doors. I can't undo the past, but I can help shape a different future. He exhaled his breath, white in the dark. I thought legacy was about preserving what I built. But I've learned it's about passing on values that let the next generation build something better, even if it's not what I imagined. For the first time in my life, I saw him not as the man who had cast me aside, but as someone capable of change. Not perfect, not erased, but changed. Inside the house hummed with laughter and debate. Emma tugged at my sleeve to show me her coding project. Jackson was already discussing college applications, rattling off names of top computer science programs. My brothers were bickering good-naturedly about AI and manufacturing. And my mother stood in the middle of it all, her presence strong, undeniable. I realized then that wealth had opened the door to reconciliation, but it wasn't the billions that kept us walking through it. It was honesty, accountability, forgiveness, and love, the messy, complicated kind that takes years to surface but feels all the stronger when it finally does. And as I looked around at my family, both the one I was born into and the one I had built, I understood something I wished I could whisper to the girl I once was crying silently in her childhood bedroom. Your worth was never measured by their approval. It lived in you all along. If you're watching this, maybe you've carried wounds that your family refused to see. Maybe you've been told you don't belong, that your path isn't valid. I want you to know you don't need their permission to shine. Your worth is not conditional. Your story matters even if they can't understand it yet. So if this story resonated with you, please like, share, and subscribe. And leave me a comment. I'd love to know if you've ever had to fight to be seen by the people who should have loved you first. Sometimes the greatest inheritance we can claim isn't money or property, but the courage to live as ourselves unapologetically, fully, and without waiting for anyone's approval.